Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Sherrone Moore, Michigan, continuing to work their way through spring practice. And, as a Michigan fan myself, I feel like every couple of days you learn just a little bit more about this Michigan team heading into 2025. And one of the things that is standing out to me is it sounds like Michigan has hit on a lot of these transfer portal additions that they made. I think they're very happy with the new faces that are coming into this program. Not only the true freshmen, guys like Bryce, guys like Andrew Babaloa, but also guys like Trey Williams, Damon Payne, Justice Haynes. Historically, Michigan's never been a team that goes out and completely replaces their roster in the transfer portal. You see teams like Ole Miss and Colorado do that. Michigan's never been a team that is going to go out and land 20 new players, but when they do decide to add players in the transfer portal, the hit rate is pretty damn high. You look at a couple of cornerbacks, Josh Wallace, Amir Hall. You look at Josiah Stewart coming off the edge. You look at Jay-Sean Barham, Ernest Hausman. When Michigan wants to go get players in the portal, they like them. And it sounds like Michigan likes a lot of the new faces that they're bringing into this program. Want to talk about a few more players that have kind of, I don't know if the right word is separated themselves, but have been generating some buzz in spring practice the last couple of days. Before we get into it, as always, the Michigan fans appreciate you guys. Again, we said this heading into spring practice. I continue to feel this way. As a Michigan fan who has followed this program my whole life, it's about as exciting of a spring practice as I can remember. It's been a blast talking it. The amount of Michigan fans who've been showing support to the boys in the months of February and March, been amazing. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it. Now, I want to start with just some overall thoughts. Number one, even with Bryce Underwood coming into this program, presumably being the quarterback one in 2025, even with Chip Lindsey coming in and taking over the offense, it seems pretty clear that Sherrone Moore does not want to lose the identity of this Michigan program, and that is dominant line of scrimmage play. And you kind of look at historically what has allowed Michigan to have all the success, especially that national championship in 2023. That's where it starts. We've seen a trend in college football where teams are going to be a little bit smaller, a little bit faster. Speed and space is probably the best way to describe the changes that we've seen in college football over the last couple of years. You've seen Michigan go the opposite way. Instead of leaning into all the speed and space, Michigan got bigger and stronger, running a lot of 12 personnel, 2 tight end sets, dominant defensive lines. That's, to me, what separated this Michigan team in 2023. I don't think Sherrone Moore wants to lose that element of this Michigan team. The second thing that I think is worth noting as we go through spring practice, there are a lot of risers on this football team. And what I mean by risers are, guys that maybe weren't ready to play at the beginning of 2024, but started to play better football towards the end of the year. I'm talking about a guy like Trey Pierce. I'm talking about a guy like Evan Link, but you're also having some guys that maybe haven't really played any significant football for Michigan that you're sitting here in spring practice and saying, could be difference makers for this team in 2025. Very similar to kind of what TJ Guy was in 2024, where TJ Guy never played any significant snaps for Michigan going into the 2024 year and became one of the best pass rushers in the Big Ten in that 2024 season. There are a lot of players on this roster who I would identify as risers, guys that might not be on the front of the magazine in the offseason, but guys that very well could end up being very good football players for this team. Now, getting into some of the buzz we have coming out, Bryce Underwood update. And, as a Michigan fan, as a college football fan who has followed this sport my whole entire life, following spring practices, it's always difficult to kind of decipher the buzz you're getting out of spring practice. And what I've come to kind of recognize is when there's kind of three ways you can get information, right? One are these, anonymous sources. Two are the coaches. Three are the players. When you start getting positive feedback it's like the holy trinity, all three of those guys, all three of those kind of sources, that's when the intel's real. And that's kind of what you're getting from Bryce Underwood, right? We all know what Bryce is capable of. You're here. I mean, Lou Esposito got up in front of a press conference the other day and was like, Bryce Underwood's different. I mean, he's Michigan's defensive line coach. I mean, he sees Bryce Underwood every day, and he kind of notices, like, this offense operating a little bit different with a guy like Bryce Underwood at the helm. You're hearing anonymous sources come as far as say, hey, Bryce Underwood is clearly the guy in spring practice as an early enrollee true freshman. You're hearing other players on this football team recognize Bryce Underwood's a little bit different. I think it's fair to say that as we sit right now, and again, Bryce hasn't even played a snap for Michigan, but as we sit right now on April 1st, I think it's fair to say that Bryce Underwood so far is kind of living up to what we thought and, quite frankly, what we expected this kid to be going into 2025, which is very exciting for us Michigan fans. The other storyline that is really starting to fire me up a little bit is what this defensive line can be. Now, we've been very clear that there's no just one for one replacing Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. But what Lou Esposito was saying about the depth and the waves of the interior defensive line, that excites me a lot because you go back to Michigan in 2024, Mason Graham was the most dominant player in all of college football, arguably. We didn't have much depth. I mean, sitting here 12 months ago, you looked at Michigan's roster and you said, hey, we probably have confidence in 3 players on the inside of the defensive line that can play high quality football for us. It's Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, who were 2 very special football players, and then Rayshon Benny, who was coming off a pretty bad injury at the end of 2023. Guys like Trey Pierce, guys like Eno Etta, guys like Ike were not quite ready, and we saw that early in 2024. You look at Mason Graham and the snap counts, the amount he had to play. He played 548 snaps as a 300-plus pound defensive lineman last year. Go back and compare that to what he was in 2023. He only played 440, playing 2 extra games, obviously, in the Big Ten Championship college football playoffs. What excites me the most here is, we don't have a Mason Graham on this roster. I think that's pretty fair to say. Mason Graham, to me, like generationally good defensive lineman, but you're way deeper. And Lou Esposito kind of noted that we can throw out waves of defensive linemen this year, as opposed to last year was Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, and Rayshon Benny kind of getting cycled in as the third guy. Depth on the defensive line is never flashy to talk about, but it's really important. You go back to 2023, what made that Michigan defensive line so special to me was, they were rotating a lot of big bodies. Where you sit going into 2025 is, what you have with Rayshon Benny. He's probably the best defensive lineman on this Michigan roster. Then you bring in Devon Payne and Trey Williams, both guys that have played a lot of football in their careers at Clemson and Alabama, respectively. Going into 2025, you have significantly more confidence in a guy like Trey Pierce, who played phenomenal football at the end of that year, especially in that bowl game against Alabama. Etta going into year 3. Ike going into 2025. To me, the number's up to 6. It's double the number that Michigan had going into 2024. Lou Esposito kind of talked about it as well. You can't replace the star talent of Mason Graham, but you can get better from a depth standpoint. It sounds like that's where Michigan is at. And then you look at the edge rushers, and what I continue to say is, like, I feel like even us Michigan fans sleep on Derek Moore. If I'm guessing if you were listening to this on April 1st, you are a diehard Michigan fan that lives and breathes this football team 12 months a year. If I were to ask a Michigan fan like some of y'all listening, hey, who do you think led Michigan in quarterback hurries in the 2024 year? You'd probably Josiah Stewart would probably be the first guess. Mason Graham would probably be the second. Well, it was Derek Moore with 27 quarterback hurries. Now, his sack numbers did not reflect that, but you talk about just pure disruption and domination. Derek Moore was extremely good for Michigan in the 2024 year. And I'll just put my hand up and say, I'm kind of with y'all. When I checked the numbers, I like double took it and was like, are we sure it was Derek Moore? It was Derek Moore. So I feel like we're kind of sleeping on the upside that Derek Moore gives this team. TJ Guy as a pure pass rusher last year was exceptional, and now you kind of want to see him take that step as an every down edge player for Michigan. Cam Brandt came on at the end of the year. You're hearing really good things about Dominic Nichols. I think Nate Marshall, he's not on campus in spring. He's going to play for Michigan in 2025 as a true freshman. I think you have the difference makers you're looking for. And I think the overall take, and Lou Esposito kind of backed this up, is, look, we don't have a Mason Graham on this football team, but we have a lot more really good football players and we're a much deeper defensive line. And I think that should excite a lot of Michigan fans where you're going to get a lot of people in the national media, especially as we start getting closer to the season, that are going to say this Michigan defensive line is going to be a problem because you lose Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. I'm not going to get up here and say this defensive line is going to be as good because you do lose some really good football players. The drop off, I don't think is going to be anything close to what you're going to hear in the national media, which should excite a lot of Michigan fans. Now, the last question mark that I think is really, kind of fascinating is, Michigan fans feel all sorts of ways about the offensive line. And Grant Newsome, look, I'm with you. As a Michigan fan myself, I'm probably more optimistic than most about this offensive line. But at the same time, I understand very well the concerns that some of y'all have. The thing that stood out to me the most was this Michigan team has a lot more versatility on the offensive line than it did last year. I mean, you look at a guy like Evan Link, who's probably going to get a look at left tackle, but Grant Newsome said, hey, he can play guard too. Brady Norton can play tackle and guard. And Brady Norton, by the way, I was kind of down on Brady Norton when I saw he was officially listed at 275 pounds. Grant Newsome's kind of up there talking about, hey, he looks like a Big Ten offensive lineman, which should excite a lot of Michigan fans. You have guys like Jake Guinera and Nathan Afobe kind of emerging as year 2, year 3 players. It's kind of wait and see mode for this offensive line, and we're going to find out real quick week 2 going on the road to Norman, Oklahoma about what this offensive line unit is. But when Grant Newsome's talking about we feel confident in a decent amount of football players and we have some versatility allowing us to try to figure out what our best 5 is, to me, that excites me. Now, the thing I would like to kind of see here is let's get a better feel of what this starting offensive lineman is going to be early. So I go back to the 2024 year and start talking about, hey, what were maybe some of the why did Michigan fall short so early in 2024? Like, this offensive line got better in 2024. Like, you go back to the month of November, this offensive line unit was playing significantly better than it was to start the season. Why did we start off so slow in 2024? To me, I just don't think we had a sense of what our best 5 was. And so we were kind of mixing and matching guys early in the season, and you could tell this unit didn't have a ton of reps together. I think one of the biggest goals for Michigan is, hey, we got to figure out what our starting 5 is and let these guys work together for the next couple of weeks and months going into 2025, especially when you have a freshman quarterback. There's a couple other names that I want to note real quick. Justice Haynes, difference maker, it sounds like. And Justice Haynes and Jordan Marshall, look, if this offensive line can pleasantly surprise us, this rushing attack should be very good. You have one of the best running back duos in the country, in my opinion, Justice Haynes, Jordan Marshall, along with Bryce Underwood, who could be a force in the run game. I'm really excited that if this offensive line can pleasantly surprise us, this run game is going to be big. And like we've talked about all year, the biggest thing you want to give Bryce is a good run game. And if we can do that to start the year, let Bryce kind of settle in and not have him have to be a superhuman in the month of September at the quarterback spot, that's big. We'll close it out there. New faces starting to stand out, getting a feel for what this really team might be in 2025. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.